The wind had claws that day. It whipped down from the Mogollon rim, dragging dust across the dry ground like it meant to skin the land bare. The shutters on the Beggy ranch creaked like old bones, and inside the main house, Nalina stood in her father's study, still dressed in morning black, listening to a white man talk about ownership like he was discussing cattle, not her future. It's not just the land, Miss Beggett, the livestock, the water rights, the grazing permits, it all falls under the debt ledger. Abner Wycliffe stood with his hat in his hands, not out of respect, but as performance. He was tall and trim, with silver temples that made him look like a judge, and eyes sharp enough to peel a man open from the inside. He moved like he already owned the place, like this was just a courtesy visit before the papers were signed. And your father, God rest him, made promises, verbal contracts, under-the-table deals. I don't want to see a good ranch swallowed by bad decisions. Nalina said nothing. Her jaw was locked so tight it hurt. Her fingers itched to grab the hunting knife tucked beneath her sash, but she didn't move. Not yet. The room smelled like cedar and dry ink. Her father's books were still on the shelf, his pipe still on the desk. He'd only been dead a week since he fell off his horse during the last cattle roundup, and now vultures circled, not in the sky, but at her front door. You're lucky I'm a practical man, Wycliffe continued. You keep the house, the livestock, the dignity of the family name. In exchange, I get what I'm owed. He didn't say it. He didn't have to. Marriage. You expect me to sign away my life because my father borrowed too heavily. It's already decided, he said simply. Nalina turned to him slowly. Her dark eyes, like obsidian wet with rain, narrowed. Not by me. A muscle twitched in Wycliffe's jaw. He stepped closer. You're a woman alone, Miss Beggett. This land is surrounded by men who take what they want when they want it. I'm offering you safety, legitimacy. You're offering me a cage with silver hinges. The front door slammed. Lulu stormed in, red-faced hair windblown. He rode out here with 2 wagons, she said. 2, they're already circling the corrals. He brought buyers. Nalina's stomach dropped. He thinks it's done. It is done, Wycliffe said, his voice low. Unless you want to watch your family's land cut up and sold to the highest bidder. You won't even have the adobe under your feet. Tocho Yazi entered behind Lulu. The old man leaned heavily on his walking stick, sun-browned and silent for a long time. The debt is real, he said at last, looking only at Nalina, but so is your right to choose what price you pay. Wycliffe scoffed. She has until sundown. After that, I bring the sheriff. Tom Holloway won't back this, Lulu snapped. He will when the law is on my side. He tipped his hat, eyes lingering too long on Nalina. Then he walked out. The silence left behind was like ash after a fire. They sat around the kitchen table as the light faded. Torcho drank black coffee and stared at the wall. Lulu paced like a mountain cat. Nalina didn't speak. Not until the last light dipped behind the ridge. How many cattle left? 283, Torcho said. Enough for a drive. No hands left to drive them, Lulu added. They all scattered after Papa died. Not all, said a voice from the porch. They turned. A man leaned in the doorway, tall and dust-worn. His coat was canvas, sweat-stained and travel-heavy. His hair curled from under his hat, and his boots looked like they'd walked 1,000 miles and didn't like any of them. Named Silas Monroe, he said. Heard there might be work. Nalina rose slowly. We're not hiring that, so. Looked like trouble to me, and trouble usually pays well. He stepped inside, not with arrogance, but purpose. His eyes flicked to the worn saddlebags, the rifle leaning in the corner, the half-filled mugs, calculating. I used to run drives north of the Rio Grande, Fort Command, road cavalry. If you need to move a herd, I'm your man. Nalina studied him. There was weariness in him, not tiredness, but a weight, like he'd seen things and hadn't looked away. She understood that feeling. Why now? Because I've spent enough years watching people lose what they love. Thought maybe this time I could do something different. Tocho spoke. If we drive the cattle to Flagstaff, sell them fast, we could pay what's owed. Maybe more. That's 100 miles. Through open country. No trail hands. No protection. Unless we make it fast, Silas said. Move at dawn. Take the back mesa route. And find men along the way. Lulu folded her arms. And why would you help us? What's in it for you? Silas looked straight at Nalina. Because I know a trap when I see one. And I don't like men who spring M on women. Torcho smiled for the first time in days. The herd is still strong. The market in Flagstaff is good. Nalina exhaled, a slow, long breath that tasted like firewood and finality. Then we ride. Outside, the moon rose like a scar peeled open in the sky. Wolves howled from somewhere far off, and in the barn, the horses shifted like they knew something was about to begin. "You can take the land," she said through gritted teeth, "but you'll never own me." His sun had barely broken the horizon when Nalina stepped out onto the porch, rifle slung across her back, boots crunching on the hard-packed earth. The air smelled of dew and dust, a rare stillness hovering over the land. It would be the last morning of quiet for a long time. Torture was already in the corral, speaking softly to the horses in Navajo as he brushed down the black gelding her father used to ride. Lulu emerged behind her, hair in 2 loose braids, carrying a saddle like it weighed nothing. She glanced at her older sister, but didn't say a word. They hadn't spoken much since agreeing to the drive. The silence between them wasn't anger, it was focus, a kind of sharpening. Neither dared speak the full weight of what they were about to attempt. Inside the barn, Silas Monroe checked his gear. He'd slept on the floor by his saddle, hat pulled low, rifle laid beside him. The man didn't seem to need a bed or sleep. When Nalina entered, he was already on his feet, cinching the strap on his pack. "You ride light," she observed. "I ride ready," he replied. She nodded once, then moved past him to check the tack. He watched her for a moment. She moved like someone used to doing everything herself, shoulders square, hands quick but precise, no wasted motion. But there was something underneath that, too, a tightness in the way she breathed, like a woman trying not to drown in open air. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No," she answered without looking up, "but I'm doing it anyway." He chuckled under his breath. "That's one way to live." They rode out before the sun cleared the butte. Lulu rode a chestnut Mustang with more spirit than sense. Tocho took the rear, a rifle across his lap, and an old army canteen clinking softly at his side. Silas rode beside Nalina, eyes scanning the horizon like a hawk. The cattle moved slow at first, dust rising in thin columns. There were fewer than a proper drive would need for a full payout, but enough to be worth something, enough to matter. About 2 hours into the ride, Lulu pulled up alongside Silas. "What did you do before this?" she asked, tone sharp. "Before you showed up in the middle of our mess." Silas didn't look at her. "Fought in a war, road trail after, worked for men I shouldn't have, then left." "Left why?" "Because good men died, and bad men got rich. Started feeling like I was on the wrong side of everything." Lulu narrowed her eyes. "You gonna turn us in for that bounty?" He finally turned. His voice was flat. "You think I'd ride into hell for a woman I don't believe in?" Lulu studied him, then pulled her horse back, unconvinced but not confrontational. She wasn't sure yet if she trusted him, but she was sure that Nalina did, and that was enough for now. By midday, they reached an old waypoint, an abandoned ranch house near a dry creek bed. The adobe walls were cracked, the well half covered in They made camp under a grove of juniper, letting the cattle graze and the horses rest. Nalina sat beneath a tree, sharpening a skinning knife, her back against the cool bark. Silas approached with 2 canteens, tossing her one. "You always this quiet?" he asked. "I talk when I need to." "I get that, but talking ain't weakness. Sometimes it's survival." She looked at him. "Talking doesn't pay the debt." He nodded slowly. "No, but it might make the road a little less lonely." There was a pause. "My father trusted the wrong men," she said finally. "They told him the railroad would come through, offered to buy early rights. He took the loan thinking we'd sell high, and it didn't. They moved the line 30 miles north. Wycliffe knew they would. He owned half the survey team. My father never stood a chance." Silas's jaw tightened. "Same thing happened to my sister," he said after a long silence. "Different game, same players. She worked for a judge in Texas. He promised her a wage, gave her a jail cell instead when she wouldn't lie for him." Nalina blinked. "What happened to her?" "She died waiting for a trial that never came." They didn't speak after that, didn't need to. The silence between them changed, less like armor, more like acknowledgement. Later that evening, after the cattle had settled and the fire was crackling low, Lulu brought out a crumpled piece of paper she'd taken from Wycliffe's wagon while he wasn't looking the week before. It was a map, routes, trails, supply stations, and a stamp from the bank in Winslow. "What's this?" Silas asked, turning the paper over. "Proof he's planning to sell the ranch to an investor out east." Lulu said, "It's not about the debt. He doesn't want the land, he wants what's under it." Nalina leaned in. Water. Tocho says the valley's got deep springs. Enough to run cattle crops even a town if you dig right. Silas rubbed a thumb over the ink. That's why he's pushing so fast. He wants the land cleared before anyone else figures it out. Then we ride harder, Nalina said, before he finds another way to stop us. But even as she said it, Silas heard something distant, sharp, gunfire, one shot. Then silence. He stood, scanning the horizon. We're not alone. Tocho came limping from the shadows, rifle raised. We've been watched since dawn, he said quietly. Scouts. 2 men. High ground, Southridge. Didn't fire, just followed Wycliffe's men. Maybe Lulu's voice was ice, or someone worse. They doused the fire fast, packed in silence, every rider with their hand close to steel. The herd stirred nervously, but the horses stayed steady. Nalina mounted up last, her face unreadable. Silas looked at her across the saddle light. You're still sure? She didn't hesitate. If I die out here, she said, at least it'll be on my own damn terms. The cattle moved slow and stubborn under the moon, their hooves stirring up silver clouds of dust. Each groan of leather, each grunt of hooves, felt louder in the stillness. The trail that had once felt like home to Nalina's father now felt like a tightrope stretched across a canyon with no bottom. No one spoke much, not after the gunshot the night before. They rode with their heads turned, hands close to their weapons, eyes twitching at shadows. Silas took point, his frame rigid in the saddle. Lulu rode rearguard with Tocho. Nalina stayed in the center of the herd, watching their flanks like a mother guarding children she didn't want but had chosen to protect anyway. At a narrow crossing between 2 red mesas, they stopped. The path ahead wound into a canyon where sound bounced in every direction, a perfect place for an ambush. We need to go around, Lulu whispered, eyeing the cliffs above. We don't have time, Silas said, scanning the high ridges. They'll expect us to take the long path. That gives us an edge if we go straight. Tocho dismounted, knees creaking. I say we cut the cattle loose if they fire. Save the riders. Nalina turned to him sharply. That herd is the only chance we have to pay the debt. And it won't matter if you're dead. She stared at him, her jaw tense, but she didn't argue. Silas leaned against his saddle horn. I'll ride ahead. Check for tracks. Give me 15 minutes. I'm going with you, Nalina said. No, Silas replied. If something happens, they need you. She didn't like it, but she nodded. Silas tapped his heels into his horse and disappeared into the mouth of the canyon, swallowed by darkness. The wind shifted. Tocho lit a bit of sage and murmured something in Navajo, letting the smoke drift like a prayer. Lulu stared down the trail, fingers flexing on her reins. Don't like this, she muttered. Feels like we're walking into a coffin. Tocho didn't respond. He just watched the horizon with eyes that had seen too many things to fear anything anymore. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, Silas returned. His face was pale in the moonlight, and his knuckles white on the reins. Fresh tracks, he said. 3 riders. Hoofprints on the north ridge. They're watching, waiting. Can we outrun them? Lulu asked. No, Silas said, but we might outsmart them. He reached into his saddlebag and unrolled a rough trail map. There's a dry wash about half a mile south. If we split the herd, send decoys through the canyon while we move the bulk through the wash under cover. Too risky, Tocho interrupted. Cattle won't move quiet through sand. Then we make noise louder elsewhere, Nalina said. Set a fire at the bluff. Draw them off. Lulu raised an eyebrow. You're thinking like a raider. I'm thinking like someone with nothing left to lose. They moved fast. Tocho and Lulu doubled back with a torch and oil, lighting brush on the ridge. Smoke climbed fast, thick and bitter. From below, it looked like the whole mountain was on fire. Nalina, Silas, and the cattle plunged into the wash. It was narrow and choked with debris, branches scraping their legs, dust rising thick. More than once, a steer balked, nearly causing a stampede. Silas rode close to Nalina. You ever done this before? Driven cattle? No, could have fooled me. I watched my father. Paid attention. He glanced over. You ride better than most men I know. Then you know the wrong men. They shared a look tense, but not hostile. Somewhere behind them, a gunshot cracked, then another, shouting horses. Lulu's diversion was working. They pushed harder. The sun began to rise behind them, gold bleeding across the rock. The cattle broke from the wash onto a flat plain. They were covered in dust and sweat, but alive. They'd made it, at least for now. They regrouped at a dry creek bed, hiding the cattle behind a grove of mesquite. Lulu returned an hour later, singed and breathless but grinning. They fell for it, chased ghosts all the way into that canyon. I even left Em a little present. What kind of present? Silas asked. Dynamite in a hollow stump. He blinked. You're terrifying. She winked. I trapped. Tocho limped up, holding a broken strap from one of the cattle yokes. We need to fix this before we move on, and we're low on water. There's a spring near Bitterwell, Silas said. Another day's ride, but it's clean. Nalina wiped the sweat from her brow. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the toll. It was only day 2 and already felt like a month. She walked away from the group, out to a rise overlooking the land. The desert stretched endlessly, broken only by bones of rock and the occasional stubborn tree. She knelt and pressed her palm into the dirt. Still ours, she whispered. For now. Silas walked up behind her quietly. You all right? No, but I will be. They stood together in the morning hush. The wind pulled at their shirts, carried grit into their boots, but neither moved. Silas reached into his coat and pulled out a coin, all scratched, silver. What's that? She asked. Token from a debt unpaid, he said, and flipped it into the air. It caught the light, spun like time itself, and landed heads up in his palm. He didn't look at it, just stared at the road ahead. I can't promise you safety, he said, but I'll fight for your chance. She looked at him, eyes unreadable. You better, she said, because we ride before the next moonrise. They rode into the high flats at first light, following a faint trail that curved along the edge of a sandstone bluff. The sun lit the world in copper and flame, every rock glowing like it had something to prove. Dust rose behind the herd in thick clouds, settling on their skin, their eyes, their thoughts. Silas kept his eyes on the ridges. Something was off. Birds were too quiet, the air too still. Even the cattle moved like they felt it, nervous and stiff-legged. Nalina felt it too. She hadn't said a word since they left the wash. Her fingers never left the grip of her rifle, and her shoulders stayed high and hard. Tocho was up ahead, scouting a narrow bend where the trail pinched tight between two cliffs. This canyon ain't right, he muttered when Silas joined him. Too many places to shoot from, too few ways out. Silas nodded. We cut through it fast. No stops, no noise. Tocho eyed the herd. Cattle don't move fast through fear. They will today, Silas said, or we don't make it. Back in the rear, Lulu pulled her horse beside Nalina. You think Wycliffe's got more men out here? She asked low. Nalina didn't answer right away. Then, I think he never intended to let us reach Flagstaff, whether by paper or bullet. Lulu bit the inside of her cheek. We should have burned his house down before we left. Nalina gave a tired smile. I thought about it. They entered the canyon at a trot. The walls rose steep on both sides, jagged and sun-bleached. Shadows stretched long across the trail, and every echo felt like a footstep behind them. The cattle bunched tighter. A few calves bawled. Dust hung in the air like fog. Halfway through, it happened. A shot rang out, then another. One of the steers collapsed in a spray of red. The herd exploded, bellowing, stomping, turning in on itself in panic. Riders screamed. Horses kicked. Rock shards flew from Ricochet's ambush. Silas shouted. Gunfire cracked from the cliffs. The Bone Gang had the high ground. 3 men on the left ridge, 2 on the right, all masked, rifles braced, firing with calm precision. Silas dismounted in a heartbeat, using his horse as cover. Returning fire up the ridge, Tocho took cover behind a boulder and picked one off. Clim, one of the right side shooters, slumped forward and tumbled down the rock face like a rag doll. Lulu wheeled her Mustang around, drawing a revolver from her saddlebag. Don't shoot unless you see a target, Nalina shouted. She had already taken position behind a low outcrop, aiming her father's rifle toward the left ridge. I see him, she breathed. One shot. A man stumbled, clutching his shoulder, screaming as he disappeared behind the rocks. Silas, they're falling back. But Silas wasn't looking at the shooters. He was watching the cattle. Half the herd had bolted down the trail, heading straight into a thicket of mesquite and thornbush. If they got tangled, they'd never make it back into formation. We have to split, he yelled. You hold them here. I'll drive them back. You'll get picked off, Lulu shouted. Then make sure they're too busy to try. He kicked his horse hard, chasing the stampede into the dust. Tocho grunted. That boy's got more heart than sense. Nalina reloaded fast. then scanned the remaining gang members were pulling back, realizing the ambush had failed. She could feel the shift in air, less chaos, more confusion, but something didn't sit right. They could have killed more. Why didn't they? Because they weren't trying to kill. They were delaying. Her blood turned to ice. She turned to Lulu. Check our gear. Check the wagons now. Lulu didn't hesitate. She ran, boots pounding across the dirt. Minutes later, she came back pale. They took the maps, she said, and Silas's satchel. Nalina cursed under her breath. They weren't trying to stop us. They were trying to learn where we're going. She looked at the horizon, where the herd had vanished into a cloud of dust, and where Silas had gone alone. She's not a criminal, Holloway whispered, staring at the bounty. But they'll hang her just the same. The dust hadn't even settled when Silas caught up to the runaway cattle. His horse galloped hard, ribs heaving with effort, hooves thundering through the dry brush. The sun crept higher above the mesas, blinding him with each twist of the trail. He leaned low in the saddle, guiding with knees and instinct. Ahead, the herd split around a dry ravine. A few calves were caught at the edge, bawling, confused. One of the bulls was limping, blood on its hind leg. Silas yanked the reins, sliding to a stop, and jumped down. "Whoa, now," he whispered, arms spread wide. He moved slow, calm, not with strength, but patience. That's what cattle understood: pressure, space, and presence. That's what soldiers forgot. These weren't machines. They were fear on four legs, and fear didn't respond to shouting. He guided the calves away from the drop-off, patting one gently along the neck. The bull followed, favoring one side, but moving. Behind him, hooves approached. Fast. He spun, drawing his revolver. But it wasn't the Bone Gang. It was Holloway. Sheriff Tom Holloway rode alone, dust-caked, his face drawn and tired under a sweat-stained hat. A rifle was strapped across his back, his badge dull and dusty on his chest. Silas didn't lower the gun. "Funny," he said. "Didn't take you for a man who rides without cause." "I don't ride without conflict either," Holloway said quietly. "Put it down, Monroe." Silas hesitated, then holstered the weapon. "What are you doing out here?" he asked. "Following blood and dust," Holloway said. "Word hit Winslow 2 days ago that Nalina Begay fled a debt and took armed men with her. Banker's got a warrant in his hand, and the governor's got ears in his pocket." Silas's face tightened. "You think she's a thief? I think she's a threat to the kind of men who've never been told no." He dismounted slowly, walking over to the bull, inspecting the wound. "Nothing vital," he murmured. "It'll make it if you wrap it." Silas watched him. "Why'd you really come?" "To see with my own eyes, figure out who's lying." And Holloway stood. "A man's only got so much silence before it becomes complicity." He reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. "Found this on a rider north of Payson. Wycliffe's man, dead from a gut wound, took 2 days to bleed out. This was in his pack." He handed it to Silas. Silas unwrapped it. His map, marked in red ink with trail crossings, water sources, alternate routes, and beneath it, another page: Nalina's father's original land deed, signed and notarized. "This is proof," Silas said, breath short. "They were planning to forge a sale." "They still are," Holloway said. "But that paper don't mean a thing if you don't live long enough to show it." Silas clenched his jaw. "Then ride with us." "I can't. Not openly." "Why not?" "Because they'll use me as a reason to kill her. Badge on her side. That'll spook the whole county into thinking she's staging an uprising." "So what? We let them write the story while we bleed for it." "No." Holloway stepped closer. "You write it quieter, smarter. I'll cover your backbutt from the shadows." He mounted again. "And Silas, she's not a criminal, but they'll hang her just the same if she gives them a reason." Silas watched him ride off, dust rising behind. Then he turned to the herd, whistled twice, and began moving them back toward the others. By the time he returned, the sun was overhead, and the canyon lay behind them like a wound, slowly healing. Nalina met him halfway, eyes scanning him for damage. "You all right?" she asked. "They didn't want to stop us," he said. "They wanted to read our path. They've got enough to cut us off if we don't shift routes." "Then we changed the plan." "Already did," he said, and handed her the oilcloth. "We've got a shot now. A narrow one, but it's ours." Lulu leaned over his shoulder. "We lose anyone?" "No," Silas said. "But we've lost time." Nalina studied the map, fingers trailing the red lines. "If we go east," she said, "we cut through open land, but it's flatter, faster. Riskier, Tocho added. No cover, no allies, no distractions either, she said. She looked up, eyes hard. We move before dusk. No more stops, no more mercy. They rode out again that night, shadows long, their faces drawn. None of them said it out loud, but they all felt it. This had stopped being about a ranch. It was about truth now, about the right to speak it and survive it. She's not a criminal, Holloway whispered, staring at the bounty, but they'll hang her just the same. The night ride east was the kind that carved itself into memory, raw, exhausting, and quiet in a way that felt sacred. The cattle plodded through the open flats under a half-moon, their silhouettes long and shivering against the starlight. Each hoofstep stirred up whispers of dust. No trees, no cliffs, just space so wide it made even pain feel smaller. They moved in silence. Every now and then, Lulu hummed to the cattle, soft and low, Navajo words, melody like a lullaby for ghosts. Tocho rode close to the herd's edge, whispering to the lead steers in a tongue older than any map. His voice was cracked but steady, grounding. Nalina didn't speak. She rode at the center of the column, her eyes on the horizon, back, straight as a spear. Wind tugged strands of her hair loose from her braid, but she didn't notice, didn't care. Her mind was elsewhere, unfolding the weight of the map Silas had returned with, measuring risk against hope, planning paths she might never live to ride. Silas rode beside her. He didn't say much either, but every few minutes his eyes would flick toward her like he was checking for cracks. Finally, around midnight, Nalina broke the silence. "Why did you come back?" He looked at her. "You could have taken that herd and left," she said. "Walked away." "I don't walk away from people who fight like hell." She raised an eyebrow. "You don't know me." "I know enough." He paused, then added, "Your father once saved a company of Union men by refusing to abandon a water source. Got shot for it twice, but he held the line. That kind of blood doesn't go soft in one generation." She looked down at her reins, fingers tightening. "My father gambled on hope," she said. "He lost. Only if you stop riding." Their eyes locked in the dark. Then the cattle shifted, dash, uneasy, dot, lowing, snorting, dot, a tension in the air, like strings pulled too tight. "Something's wrong," Lulu said behind them. "They smell something." Tocho pulled up beside her, his voice low and grim. "Coyotes." "No," Tocho said. "Worse." Then came the sound, dash, hooves, dot, lots of them. A thunder, low and fast, rolling like storm wind over stone. They turned and saw the shapes, 5 riders, lanterns glowing amber in the dark, coming in fast from the ridgeline. Dust rose around them like fire smoke. Silas reached for his rifle, Nalina already dismounting, moving to the front of the herd. "Stay calm," she barked. "No shots unless they draw first." The riders came in hard, too fast to be careful, not fast enough to be charging. When they slowed, the dust peeled back to reveal their faces. One wore a black bandana over his mouth. Another had a hat made of coyote fur, but it was the middle rider who mattered. He didn't wear a mask, didn't carry a rifle. He had a silver star on his chest and hate in his eyes. "Evening," said Sheriff Isaac Breed from the town of Dalton's Hollow. "Heard there was a stolen herd moving through my county." "We've broken no law," Nalina said calmly. "Funny," Breed smirked. "Papers in my hand say otherwise. Got a warrant, with your name on it and everything. Claims you stole property from a bank and threatened a government official." "That's a lie," Silas growled. Breed looked at him. "Ain't nobody talking to you, dog." The insult was sharp and deliberate. Tocho rode forward, face unreadable. "We don't want trouble." "Too late," Breed said. "You brought it with you." He raised the warrant and waved it in the air. "You can come quiet, Miss Beggy, or we do this the loud way." The tension snapped tight. Silas's hand hovered above his revolver. Nalina's heart pounded like war drums. Tocho whispered something in Navajo, one word. "Wait. This ain't about justice," Silas said. "It's about making sure a woman like her never gets to own anything a man wants." Tocho's quiet warning cut through the rising tension like a knife through rawhide. Everyone froze. Nalina didn't lower her rifle, but she didn't fire. Her breath came slow, heavy, measured. She watched Sheriff Breed's eyes and saw what she needed. He was enjoying this. The power, the fear, the slow pressure of law twisted to suit greed. "Let me see the warrant," she said. Breed laughed, a dry rattle in the dark. "Sure, but you don't get to read it from the back of a horse." He waved the parchment again, a showy little performance. "You want to come see it? You dismount." Put that rifle down, and we'll talk civilized. Funny, Silas said from beside her, voice low but sharp. You ride 5 men deep in the middle of the night with lanterns lit and rifles half-drawn and call that civilized? Breed didn't even glance his way. You one of her hired guns? Or just sleeping in her tent for free? Silas's fingers twitched near the grip of his Colt, but Nalina shot him a warning glance. Not yet. Breed smiled wider. See, this whole thing could have gone easy, but you folks got stubborn. All you had to do was turn around. Let the courts figure it out. Lulu barked a bitter laugh. The courts bought and sold 6 times over before we get one sentence out. Wycliffe owns half the county. Breed's grin faltered, just for a second, then he turned back to Nalina. This is your last offer. Come with us. Quiet, civil. You'll get your day to speak, I promise. To who? Nalina asked. A judge who owes Wycliffe to ranchers and a mistress. Breed's smile dropped for good. She hit the nerve. He looked to his men. One of them shifted in the saddle. Another fingered the trigger of his rifle, nervous. Silas dismounted slowly, not threatening, just smooth. His boots hit the dirt with a thud. I've seen 100 lawmen like you, he said. Badges pinned to cowards, riding the law like a weapon instead of a duty. Breed's lip curled. Watch your mouth. But Silas kept going, stepping forward, slow, deliberate. This ain't about justice. It's about making sure a woman like her never gets to own anything a man wants. The riders, T-E-N-S-E-D. And just when it seemed the powder keg would blow, Tocho cleared his throat. I remember you, Sheriff, he said from the edge of the herd. Used to sell snake oil and dirty whiskey out of your posse wagon till the railroad came through. Now you're wearing a tin star and pretending it came with integrity. Breed's face turned red in the lantern light. You say another word, old man. But Tocho was already turning his horse. You won't shoot us in the back. Not tonight. You're here to scare us off the trail. Slow us down. Wycliffe's the one who wants her broken, not buried. For a long, brutal second, no one moved. Then Breed reined in his horse. Trail's only so long, Miss Beggy, he said. And men like me, we always find the end. He flicked the reins and turned. His men followed, their shadows shrinking into the dark like wolves returning to the brush. The silence that followed was heavy and hot. The herd had settled again, the cattle breathing slow, unsure if the threat had passed. Lulu spit into the dirt. We should have killed him. No, Nalina said. He wants us to make that mistake. She turned to Silas. We move now. No stops till we reach the bluff above Bitter Well. If they're following, they'll expect us to hole up at dawn. We won't, Silas said. She shook her head. No, we ride straight through. Tocho nodded grimly. It's not about surviving anymore. No, Nalina said, looking east. It's about winning. This ain't about justice, Silas said. It's about making sure a woman like her never gets to own anything a man wants. The ride through Bitter Well Basin was dry, brutal, and almost too quiet. The land flattened into hard-packed shale and sun-bleached scrub, dotted with skeletal trees and rock outcrops sharp as broken bone. The wind bit through the seams of their coats, flinging grit into their eyes, their mouths, their thoughts. It was the kind of ride that stripped a person down to what they really were. No trees, no cover, no lies. They hadn't slept in 20 hours. The cattle moved slow, nerves still raw from the standoff with Breed's men. The herd was thinner now, one steer lost to the ambush, another limping badly and falling behind. Torcho road drag, guiding the straggler forward with murmured Navajo and a cracked length of switchwood dot at the front. Nalina led the column, eyes narrowed against the rising sun. Her face was burned red from wind and dust, her lips dry and split, but her spine stayed straight. She didn't sag, she didn't flinch. She moved like the trail owed her something and she meant to collect. Beside her, Silas rode quiet. He'd stopped asking if she needed rest, stopped offering water she wouldn't drink. He knew the rhythm now. Her silence wasn't emptiness, it was focus, a kind of prayer without words. But even prayers have breaking points. By midday, they stopped near a rock face that offered a sliver of shade. Lulu hopped down first, grabbing the canteens and handing one to Nalina. Drink, she said. Don't argue. Nalina took it. She drank in short sips, jaw tight. Torcho sat with his back to a stone, boots off, rubbing a swelling blister with lard from a pouch. We're not built for this pace, he muttered. Neither are the cattle. We don't have a choice, Silas said. If we slow now, Breed circles around and pins us at the old wellhead. He's too close, Lulu agreed. That bastard's riding with maps. Ours. Not anymore, Silas replied, pulling a folded paper from his coat. I made a new one, changed every marker, shifted the course. Nelina looked up. You did that by memory. He shrugged. I don't forget places I nearly die in. She allowed herself a flicker of a smile. It didn't last. Next leg is the bluff, she said. We need elevation. If they're tracking us, that's where we see them coming. Lulu frowned. And if they're already up there? Nelina stood, brushing dust from her coat. Then we take it from them. They moved again by late afternoon. The wind changed sharper now, cooler, a sign the bluff was near. The cattle picked up pace, noses catching the scent of distant water. Not enough to drink, just enough to tease. They reached the base of the bluff by sundown. It rose like a wall from the flatland, jagged red rock and loose shale, cut by a narrow switchback trail, not built for cattle. But barely. Lulu stared at it. We drive them up that. We have to, Nelina said. There's no other path, and it gives us the only advantage left. We'll lose 3, maybe 4, Torcho warned. I know. No one said the rest out loud. If they didn't take the high ground, they'd lose everything. The climb began at twilight. Torcho and Lulu guided the herd with ropes, whistles, and gentle prods. Silas scouted ahead, rifle across his chest, eyes scanning every rise for silhouettes. Nelina took the rear this time. She wanted to see it. All of it. The land, the cost, every step it took to win back what was stolen. Halfway up, a young steer lost its footing and tumbled, legs flailing. It landed hard, bones cracking. The others balked. Panic rippled. Silas shouted, "Keep them moving. Don't let him freeze." Nelina whistled sharp 2 notes, like her father had taught her hand. The lead steer pressed forward again, drawing the rest behind it. They made the bluff. By nightfall, exhausted, dust-caked, shaking, but alive, they set camp in the shadow of a twisted pine tree clinging to the edge. Below them, the basin stretched wide and empty, miles of trail swallowed by darkness. Silas sat next to Nelina as she bandaged a gash on her arm cut from a fall against the bluff. "You're bleeding," he said. She didn't look up. "Then I'm still breathing," he chuckled. "You ever let anyone patch you up? Only if they can do it without talking." He passed her a canteen, then looked out over the edge. "We've got a view now, until they take it from us." Silas glanced at her. "You really believe we'll make it?" Nelina didn't answer right away. "Then, I believe in the fight. You don't get freedom handed to you," she said. "You take it, and you hold on till your hands bleed." The stars burned sharp above them, cruel and beautiful, the kind of sky that reminded Nelina how small they all were, and how far she'd come without anyone to pray to but herself. The fire was low, crackling between stones they'd arranged in a circle. Not for warmth, it was still too hot for that, but for the illusion of safety. Cattle huddled nearby, the ones that hadn't collapsed from exhaustion. Torcho was dozing upright, his hand still gripping a rope tied to the last steer's harness. Lulu leaned against her saddle, chewing jerky like it was made of regret. Silas stoked the fire, letting the sparks drift upward like dying fireflies. Nelina sat across from him, knees drawn up, arms wrapped tight across them. She hadn't spoken much since the climb. She barely ate. Her hands were blistered raw, her lips cracked, and her eyes, they weren't just tired. They were grieving something she hadn't named yet. Silas broke the silence. "You ever think about quitting?" She didn't move. "All the time," he nodded. "And yet you don't." She looked up at him now, not angry, just worn. "Because if I quit, I teach them they were right." "Who?" "Men like Wycliffe, Breed, all of them. The ones who think we should be grateful just to exist in the shadows of their power." Silas leaned back on his hands. "You know, most folks I meet just want peace. They'll settle for safety if peace is too expensive. I don't want peace if it means silence," she said. He studied her in the firelight. "You sound like a woman who's already buried too many pieces of herself." Nelina gave a soft, humorless laugh. "You ever try living as a woman without a man's name behind her, without a father, or a husband, or a sheriff's favor? You don't get to bury parts, you get buried whole. Every time you stand up, they take something from you." She reached into her coat, pulled out the folded deed, the one her father had fought for, the one that was supposed to mean something. "This land was ours," she said. "We worked it, we bled into its dirt, and the second he died, they tried to take it. like his promises died with him. She looked up, eyes hard and gleaming. "You don't get freedom handed to you," she said. "You take it, and you hold on till your hands bleed." Silas didn't argue, didn't try to soothe it. He just nodded. "I'll ride with you," he said. All the way. She gave him a long look. "You already are." The fire snapped sharply between them. From the ridge above, Lulu called softly, "Riders, North Trail." Could be scouts. Nalina stood. No more rest, no more delay. She turned to the others, voice calm but firm. "Get ready to move. We're not waiting for morning." Tocho groaned awake. "We just got here." "And they just caught up," she replied. Lulu jogged down the slope, her rifle slung over her shoulder. "You think it's Wycliffe's men?" "No," Nalina said, sliding her gloves on. "I think it's worse." Silas raised an eyebrow. "How do you know?" "Because they're coming quiet." She mounted her horse, the others falling in quickly behind. The herd was slow to stir, but it moved, always did, like it understood something about the humans guiding it, like it trusted them not to lead it straight into death. But trust had limits, and Dawn would test all of them. "You don't get freedom handed to you," she said. "You take it, and you hold on till your hands bleed." They rode through the dark like ghosts with a purpose. The cattle lumbered slowly down the back slope of the bluff, hooves sliding on loose gravel, lowing in complaint. Every sound felt sharper now, the snap of a twig, the creak of a saddle, the hush of boots against rock. The stillness didn't feel safe. It felt like a breath being held. Nalina led the column again, her silhouette taut in the half-light before dawn. Silas rode beside her, eyes scanning the eastern horizon. Behind them, Lulu whispered to the cattle like a mother, urging children through a storm. Tocho took rear guard with a shotgun across his lap. The northern ridge loomed on their left, shadowed and sharp, and that's where the riders came from. No warning, no noise, just motion. 3 shapes emerged from the dark, fast, deliberate, rifles raised. They weren't wearing badges, and they weren't dressed like Wycliffe's men. These were lean, desert-hardened, and confident in ambush. Nalina didn't panic. She didn't have to. Her rifle was already up. She fired first. The shot echoed like a thunderclap. One rider jerked backward and toppled from his horse, his body vanishing in the dust. Silas fired next, winging the second rider's arm. The man yelped and wheeled away, vanishing behind a cluster of rocks. The third rider turned and bolted, but not before tossing something from his saddlebag. It hit the ground with a heavy thud, a burlap sack. Silas rode forward, dismounted, and opened it. Inside, a bundle of papers, ledger books, maps, and a note. Nalina took it, unfolding it with hands that didn't shake, even though they probably should have. The note was short. 1 line, handwritten in tight, formal script. "Burn this before they find you." Lulu peered over her shoulder. "Whose handwriting?" Nalina stared at it for a long moment. Then she whispered, "My mother's." Tocho rode forward, frowning. "I thought she passed years ago." "She did," Nalina said. "Or so I was told." She stood still, wind pulling her braid like a whisper from the past. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes were burning. Silas watched her carefully. "What's in the ledger?" She opened the top book. Her breath caught names, transactions, bribes, deeds, pages and pages of them. Not just Wycliffe, but his network. Judges, sheriffs, railroad men, all of them bought, all of them marked, and there it was, her father's name, crossed out. Next to it, foreclosure reacquired by January 2nd, initial NALINR. Single quotes as hand gripped the page so hard it crumpled. "He didn't just take the land," she said. "He erased him." Silas's voice was low. "And your mother?" Nalina turned another page. A signature, at the bottom of a notarized agreement. Her mother's, dated months after she was supposedly buried. She signed over the last of the ranch. Nalina whispered, "Under pressure, threat of jail." Lulu's jaw clenched. "They made her choose between her life and yours." Tocho looked grim. "And now someone out there wants you to finish what she couldn't." The sky was beginning to shift, the stars fading to a dim silver against the pale bruising of morning. They didn't move for a long while. Then Nalina turned to the others, holding the papers tight against her chest. "This changes everything," she said, "or it puts a bigger target on our backs." Silas replied. She nodded. "Good. Let them come. We've got names now. We've got proof." She mounted up again. "Let's get to the ridge above Twin Hollow before nightfall." If this is what I think it is, Wycliffe's going to bring hell with him. If they want war, Nelina said, eyes on the dawn, then they'll learn what it costs to fight someone with nothing left to lose. The sun broke the horizon in streaks of dull orange and worn gold, painting the desert in light that felt too fragile for the truth they'd just uncovered. Every shadow it touched seemed to stretch longer, darker, like the names in that ledger were casting weight across the land itself. They rode in silence at first. Even Lulu, who usually filled the mornings with muttered songs or stories about wild cousins and stolen horses, kept her mouth shut. Her eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead, wide and watchful. The weight of those documents, those names, had changed the air between them. Silas rode next to Nelina. He kept glancing at the ledger in her saddlebag like it might catch fire from the inside. You'd think the name list's real, he asked finally. It's real, Nelina said without looking at him. Too many details, too many things only my mother could have known. Silas hesitated. So what now? You march into Flagstaff and throw it on a judge's desk. She turned her head toward him slowly. No judge in Flagstaff would live long enough to read it out loud. So we need a witness, she said. Someone with a voice louder than a courtroom. He guessed she shook her head. Too local, Sheriff Holloway. She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled the reins and slowed her horse. The others did too. Dust swirled around their boots. Up ahead, nestled between two cliffs, lay a half-buried structure, old stone, mostly rubble, an abandoned mission church, long since given over to wind and time. But it wasn't the ruin that made her stop. It was what lay beside it. 3 horses tethered, fresh tracks, still steaming from breath. They weren't alone. Torcho dismounted without a word. He cocked his shotgun, then nodded to Silas, who already had his rifle shouldered. Nelina approached slowly, boots crunching on broken earth. She kept her hand near the revolver on her hip, but she didn't draw. Inside, Lulu whispered, eyes narrowing. They moved as one, Nelina and Silas up front, Lulu circling left, Torcho hanging back for cover. The church doors creaked as they opened, hinges groaning like a warning too late to matter. Inside, 3 people sat around a gutted altar, rifles within reach. One of them was a woman, mid-50s, hair braided with turquoise beads, skin like sun-baked leather, face sharp as chiseled stone. She looked up, and Nelina stopped cold. Mother. The word came out before she could stop it. No tremble, just pure disbelief. The woman stood. Lulu cursed under her breath. Well, I'll be damned. Torcho stepped inside last and leaned against the doorframe. We thought you were dead. I was, said the woman, just not in the way you think. Nelina couldn't move. Her hand dropped from her gun. Her voice, when it came again, was quieter. You left. You didn't even say goodbye. I was forced, her mother replied. Wycliffe came with 5 men and a false warrant. Said if I didn't sign over the land, they'd arrest you for theft, accused your father of fraud, and bury us both. Then why hide? Silas asked, stepping forward. The woman looked at him. The only way to kill a story is to make sure no one lives to tell it. Nelina stared at her mother, this woman who had once read her stories by firelight and now stood like a stranger between bullets and memory. Sent that sack, she said. The woman nodded. Everything they've done, everything they're planning, it's in those pages. But it won't matter unless someone speaks it loud enough to burn their names into the wind. Then help us, Nelina said. Stand with us. I can't. Why? Her mother hesitated, and in her eyes was a kind of sorrow so deep it didn't need words. Then she said, because they already know I'm alive, and they're coming for me tonight. If they want war, Nelina said, eyes on the dawn, then they'll learn what it costs to fight someone with nothing left to lose. The old church held its breath, stone walls cracked by time and weather now. Listen to the blood of 3 generations drum against the silence. Outside, wind pressed through broken windows like it was trying to get in on the truth. Inside, Nelina stared at her mother like a gun that had misfired, shocked, still dangerous. You knew we were coming? Nelina asked, voice brittle. I knew someone would, her mother replied. Didn't expect it to be you. That ledger, the map, you planted them. Why? Because I couldn't speak for myself. Not out loud. But you still could. Silas stepped forward, jaw tense. You said Wycliffe's coming tonight. With who? Her mother Sada. Beggar turned toward the ruined altar. On it lay a wrapped satchel, stained and weathered. She opened it and pulled out a worn tin badge, a tattered U.S. Marshal's seal, and a rusted key. Not just Wycliffe, she said. He's hired mercenaries, same ones who cleaned out the Yavapai families up north. They work in silence, ride with no colors, no oaths. They're not law, Lulu said, disgust in her voice. No, Seda replied. They're the absence of law. They erased what's inconvenient. Tocho spoke up from the corner, arms crossed. You mean to tell me they're coming to finish what they started 20 years ago? Seda didn't blink. Yes, and you stayed here? Silas asked. I stayed because I have something they want, she said, holding up the rusted key. And if I run, it goes with me. If I die, it gets buried. Either way, they don't win. Melina's voice dropped. What does it open? Seda met her daughter's gaze. A vault beneath the land office in Prescott. It holds original deeds, unaltered titles, oaths of sale, the things Wycliffe paid to disappear. Silence dropped like a stone. That key, Lulu said, that's what they're riding for. Seda nodded. They'll come fast. Maybe 30 men. At dusk, Tocho let out a slow whistle. We've got 6 people and a herd of cattle. 7, said a voice from the doorway. All heads turned. Sheriff Tom Holloway stood in the open frame, dust-covered, rifle in one hand. You didn't think I'd let you play war without me, he said. Silas looked surprised. You trailed us. No, I got word from one of Wycliffe's own clerks. She sent a telegram, said a ghost had surfaced in Bitter Well. He looked to Seda. I didn't believe it, till now. Seda gave a small, tired nod. You look older, you look dead, Holloway said without malice. They shared a moment, one the others couldn't interpret. Then Holloway turned back to the group. They'll come at dusk. That gives us 6 hours to fortify. Nelina's mind was already spinning. We use the cattle, she said. Set them in the ravine path. Block the eastern entrance. Lulu, you rigged firebombs. If they come through fast, we light the trail. Smoke'll buy us time. Tocho, she continued, take Silas and check the back ridge. If there's a sniper position, we use it. And me? Seda asked. Nelina looked at her mother, truly looked. You stay alive. The older woman raised an eyebrow. That's not the kind of help I offer. It is now. Outside, the wind picked up. The first signs of dusk streaked across the far side of the basin. They had hours, and if they failed, they wouldn't get another sunrise. By the time they ride in, Nelina said, voice like steel, they won't be facing a daughter, they'll be facing everything they tried to bury. The sun began its descent, like a blade sliding slow across the skin of the sky. Gold turned to rust, and rust to blood. Shadows stretched long across the mission ruins, licking at the corners of stone and bone. Time moved differently now, slower, heavier, like the earth itself was holding its breath. They worked in silence, each movement deliberate, tense with purpose. Torcho and Silas had climbed the rear ridge and marked the sniper's perch beneath a stone overhang. From there, they could see the whole basin. Torcho had unpacked a long-range rifle wrapped in cloth oilskin, a relic from his buffalo hunter days. His hands shook when he loaded it, but not from fear. Been a while since I aimed at a man, he said. Silas didn't answer. He was setting traps along the ledge, tripwires tied to cans, rattlesnake tails, and even an old harmonica. Tocho raised an eyebrow. Silas shrugged. If they're gonna come, they might as well sing first. Down below, Lulu had turned cattle gear into weaponry. Oil-soaked rags stuffed into glass bottles, 2 saddlebags full of black powder cartridges. She lined them across the eastern path and tied them to fuse wire and matches. Rancher's fireworks, she muttered, wiping sweat from her neck. Sheriff Holloway walked the perimeter, checking firing lanes, adjusting stone barricades with practiced precision. He had fought in 3 small wars and lost friends in all of them. This time, he planned not to lose anyone. Inside the old mission, Seda Begay sat alone near the altar, wrapping her wrists in leather strips. Her hair was tied tight, beads removed. Her turquoise necklace was gone. She didn't want anything pretty on her, if tonight went bad. Nelina approached her mother slowly, unsure how to begin. You should be resting, Seda said without looking up. You should be gone. I told you. I'm not running. Nelina sat beside her. The light through the broken window split across Seda's face, half in firelight, half in dusk. When I was 16, Nelina said quietly, I snuck into the barn one night. Found father crying. Seda looked over at her, startled. He was holding a letter. Yours. You'd been gone for weeks by then, but you'd sent him words. Said you were safe. Said not to come looking. Seda swallowed hard. I remember. He burned it, Nelina said. Right there. Said some stories had to die if we wanted to live. Silence passed between them. I hated him for that, she admitted. And I hated you. Seda closed her eyes. Good, she whispered. Hate is easier to survive than grief. Nelina stood, pulling her rifle strap tighter over her chest. Well, tonight, we make room for something harder. Outside, the wind shifted. A smell rode in on its horses. Leather, sweat, gun oil. Then came the sound. Distant hooves, slow and steady. Dozens. Sheriff Holloway climbed the bell tower and scanned the horizon with his spyglass. 30, maybe 35 riders, he said, voice grim. 3 covered wagons behind them. Looks like heavy guns. Mercs. Lulu asked. He nodded. The kind who don't stop until someone stops breathing. Nelina mounted her horse, rode to the bluff edge, and looked down. The dust trail rising behind Wycliffe's force curled like smoke from a funeral fire. She turned to her people. Her family. We hold them here. Seda loaded her revolver. You sure? Nelina met her eyes. I'm sure of one thing. She turned back to the open land. This time, we end it. The sun hit the edge of the world, and hell followed. By the time they ride in, Nelina said, voice like steel, they won't be facing a daughter, they'll be facing everything they tried to bury. The first shot came just before dusk. Not from the ridge, not from their side, from the east. A sharp crack that split the wind, followed by the whine of a ricochet off stone. It struck just feet from Lulu, sending a shower of dust into her eyes. She dropped behind the barricade with a curse. They're early, she shouted, or just eager. Silas growled, already kneeling beside Tocho on the ridge, with his scope locked toward the horizon. There 3 spotters moving through the sage, light-footed, trained. Tocho grunted. ICM. The old man fired. 1 rider went down before he hit the ground. The others vanished like mirages. Below, Wycliffe's force had spread out like oil across water. Mounted men fanned into a crescent, rifles aimed uphill. The 3 wagons moved slow and steady, covered in thick hide tarps. No flags, no markings, just death on wheels. At the center of it all sat Sheriff Breed, pale hat gleaming in the low light, smirking like a man who thought God took bribes. Nelina stood at the edge of the crumbling mission, rifle resting on the stone parapet. She'd been watching him for minutes, long minutes. She knew his type, men who wore power like perfume, expecting everyone to breathe it in. Breed raised a hand. The attack began. Gunfire erupted across the ridge in a deafening cracking bursts that chewed through dust, shattered rock, and shattered air. The barricades shook. The ground kicked. Holloway barked orders from the bell tower. Keep low. Pick your lanes. Don't waste shots. Lulu lit the first fuse. The firebomb arced beautifully, trailing sparks as it flew, and exploded near the first wave of riders. Horses screamed. Men cursed. Smoke poured thick and oily. That's right, you bastards, she muttered. We ain't paper. From the ridge Tocho adjusted his sights. As a preacher on Sunday. Another shot. Another merc down. Silas moved like smoke, flanking between sniper nests, checking ammo, spotting for Tocho. Inside the mission, Seda knelt beside a cache of rifles and reloaded with methodical grace. Her eyes never left the door. Nelina stayed on the wall, directing with short, clear commands. Her heart pounded, but not with fear, with fury. Righteous, controlled fury. This is our ground, she shouted. Let them try and take it. Down below, Breed waved again. The second wave surged forward. This one carried shields, metal-plated boards mounted to horses, like something out of a medieval war. Holloway fired from the tower, but the bullets glanced. They're pushing for the church, he called out, fast and close. Nelina didn't hesitate. Lulu light the second path. Lulu nodded and struck the match. This one was bigger, a buried keg of powder stolen from a mining camp months ago. As the front riders reached the narrow path, the fuse hissed into the dark, and the trail exploded. A blast of fire and stone tore upward, tossing horse and man into the air like broken dolls. Dirt rained down in black clouds. Screams echoed off the bluff. Silas ducked behind a ledge and yelled, "That'll buy us 10 minutes. Totra." Nelina called out, "Focus fire left side. They'll try to flank through the creek bed." "Already got 'em sighted," the old man called back. And then a strange stillness, a pause. In the smoke, a single figure emerged. Not Breed, not Wycliffe, a woman, wrapped in a long black coat, rifle slung across her back. She walked calmly, untouched by fire or bullet. Her eyes were hidden behind tinted spectacles, her hands empty. She raised one arm, and the third wagon opened inside a mounted Gatling gun. "Get down," Holloway shouted. "They're bringing hell." "This ain't a shootout anymore," Holloway said. "It's a siege." The Gatling gun whirred to life, with a shriek that didn't sound made by man or machine. It was something in between. Bullets screamed through the dark like hornets from hell, stitching the ridge with fire and thunder. Stone walls cracked. A wooden beam inside the mission shattered and dropped with a crash. Dust and splinters filled the air. Lulu was knocked flat, her coat torn by flying debris. Silas dragged her behind a half-collapsed wall, shielding her with his body. Silas shouted over the gunfire, "Can you hit the crank?" Torcho had already moved low and fast closer to the edge of the ridge. His breath was shallow, his hands quick, but precise. He wiped his scope with his sleeve, exhaled, and waited for the rhythm. The gun spun again. The Merc behind it was shielded by 2 planks and a metal brace. Head barely visible, Torcho fired once. The bullet struck just above the man's ear. Blood splattered the wood. The crank stopped turning, but a second man took his place before the first even hit the wagon floor. "They've got backups," Torcho spat. "Goddamn vultures." Below, Breed watched the assault like a man watching a campfire and not invested. Nalina crawled through the ruins toward Seda. "We can't hold this ridge under direct fire," she said, ducking as a bullet skipped off the stone. "We don't have to," Seda said calmly. "We just have to hold long enough." "For what?" Seda didn't answer. She opened her satchel, pulled out a flare, a single red stick. She lit it. Nalina blinked. "Who's that for?" Seda looked out toward the western hills. "A favor I've been waiting 20 years to call in." The flare hissed, rose high, and burst in a blood-red arc against the night sky. For a moment, nothing. Then the sound came. Horns, dozens of them. From the west, over the hills, came riders, dust clouds rising like a stampede. Navajo and Mexican ranchers, some on horseback, others on foot, old allies, former friends, outlaws who remembered a name that hadn't been spoken aloud since the old land war. Seda Begalulu saw them first and whooped. "Well, I'll be goddamned." Breed stood in his stirrups, eyes wide, mouth set in a grimace. "Hold your lines," he shouted, but doubt was already in his voice. From the tower, Holloway let out a deep, almost feral laugh. "Well, Breed, guess you picked the wrong ghost to chase." Nalina stood, fully now, and lifted her rifle. Her voice rose clear across the broken stone. "Push forward, Silas, Torcho, Lulu." They surged from cover, flanking through the mission's side, cutting through smoke and bullets like wolves unchained. The Allied riders swept into the east like a river of vengeance. Their gunfire cracked like thunder, scattering Breed's front line. The mercenaries hesitated, confused by the new front. That's all it took. Torcho took the shot that destroyed the Gatling's crank. Lulu tossed a firebomb into the nearest supply cart, igniting black powder and packs of ammunition in a roar. Breed turned his horse, eyes scanning desperately. But Nalina saw him, and she moved, through the rubble, through fire, straight at him. He saw her too late. She fired once. His shoulder. He dropped the reins. He reached for his pistol. She kicked it from his hand. He fell back into the dust, stunned, staring up at her. "You've got no badge, no army, and no God left," she said, pressing the barrel of her revolver to his temple. Breed spat blood. "You think killing me ends it?" "No," she said, eyes blazing, "but it sure as hell starts something." "This ain't a shootout anymore," Holloway said. "It's a siege." The battlefield still smoked, the air thick with burnt powder and the raw stench of blood. Horses wandered loose, snorting, their flanks streaked with sweat and ash. The sounds of gunfire had faded to a silence, so sudden it felt wrong, like the desert itself was waiting to see what came next. Nalina stood over Sheriff Breed's body. She hadn't pulled the trigger, yet his hand hovered inches from the dirt, twitching, like it still thought it could reach a weapon. Blood soaked the shoulder of his coat, spreading like a slow poisonous flower. "I never thought it'd be you," he said, breathing hard. "Thought I'd buried your whole damn line." "You tried," she said, "but we rooted deeper than you planned." Around them, the surviving mercs were being rounded up or chased off. Holloway's voice barked orders through the dusk, commanding both the Allied riders and her own crew, with that unmistakable edge of command that came from surviving more than he'd ever brag about. Seda approached slowly from the mission, steps, Her revolver lowered, but not holstered. Her face was unreadable. The red flare's glow still stained the sky behind her like an open wound. "He's not the one," Seda said, eyes on Breed. "Wycliffe was always the hand. This one, he's just the finger that pulled the trigger." Breed let out a bloody laugh. "You think Wycliffe will stop just because a bunch of half-breeds and ghosts made some noise in the dirt?" "No," Nelina said, "but he'll feel it." She knelt beside him, close now, so close he could see the cut above her brow, the dried blood in her hair, the dust that clung to her cheeks like war paint. "You told everyone it was already decided," she said, "that the law belonged to men like you, that we didn't get to speak." She pulled his pistol from his holster and emptied it, one bullet at a time. "Well," she said, voice low, steady, "not by me." She stood and walked away. Breed didn't move, didn't speak, didn't dare. Lulu joined her near the mission gate, cradling her rifle like a child. "He's not worth the bullet anyway." Nelina didn't reply. Silas was crouched near the wounded. Torcho helped drag two men to cover, both allies. He moved like a man twice his age now. The cost of the fight was everywhere, in torn skin, broken bone, breathless chests. Seda met her daughter's eyes. "We still have to get to Prescott." "I know," Nelina said. "Tonight." Holloway approached, wiping blood from his cheek. "That ledger you've got, ... It's going public," Nelina said. "First light." Holloway hesitated. "You do that. Wycliffe won't just send he'll send suits. Men with pens, sharper than any blade." "Then I'll bleed in ink if I have to," she said. The sheriff gave a grim smile. "You've got 5 hours till dawn. If you ride hard, you can get to the Prescott land office before they do." Seda handed her the rusted key. "I've carried this long enough." Nelina took it, pressed it against her palm like it was the last piece of her father. She had left. Then she looked at her crew. "All of you, gear up. We ride." Lulu nodded. "I'll check the mounts." Silas grabbed his rifle. "I'll scout ahead." Torcho groaned. "You'd better make sure there's coffee on the other side of this." Nelina swung into the saddle, turned back toward the ruined mission one last time. Smoke curled around the broken bell tower like a final breath. She didn't whisper goodbye. She didn't need to. This wasn't the end. It was the reckoning. "He said it was already decided," Nelina muttered. "Well, I say the decision just changed hands." The desert night had teeth. Cold wind whipped through the open flats, turning sweat into ice against the rider's skin. Every hoofbeat echoed too loud, too sharp. The moon was only a sliver, barely enough light to see the trail, but enough to cast shadows that moved like things alive. They rode hard. Nelina led with the rusted key tied tight around her neck, tucked beneath her collar like a piece of armor. Her jaw was clenched, eyes set ahead. Behind her came Silas, Lulu, Torcho, Seda, and Sheriff Holloway, riding in tight formation. The remaining allies from the skirmish had stayed behind to protect the wounded and hold the mission. The 6 of them were alone now, but they rode like a storm. Silas edged up beside her. "You think Wycliffe knows we're coming?" "He always knew," she said. "He just never thought we'd get this far." "You sure that vault's even real?" "I'm not sure of anything," she replied, "but the key feels heavier than a lie." Behind them, Torcho cursed as his horse stumbled over a loose rock. Damned trail's been cursed since '75. Seda, riding steady, didn't even flinch. "That's because this land remembers." Lulu snorted. "Then, let's hope it remembers us kindly." They rode for hours, crossing ravines and weaving between cactus stands like ghosts sliding across a graveyard. At one point they passed a burnt-out homestead, just a chimney left standing against the stars. No one said a word. Then just past 3 a.m. they saw the lights. Prescott. Faint glows like candle flames in a jar, flickering behind shuttered windows. The land office sat on the far end of town, a 2-story structure with thick stone walls and a heavy oak door. No guards, no lanterns, just silence and shadow. Too quiet. They dismounted 100 yards out and approached on foot. Silas went first, crouched low, rifle ready. He checked the perimeter, then waved them forward. Holloway jimmied the lock, but it wasn't necessary. The door creaked open under his hand, unlocked. Nalik was gut tightened. "Trap," Lulu whispered. "Maybe," Nelina said, pulling the key from her neck. "Or maybe they think no one would be stupid enough to try this." She pushed open the door. Inside, it smelled like dust and paper. Tall shelves rose on either side, packed with files and ledgers. A long counter stretched along the left. covered in ink blotters, stamping seals, and file boxes. The vault was at the back, steel, blackened with age, a brass keyhole in the center. Nelina stepped forward, heart pounding. The key slid into the lock with a soft click. It turned. The door creaked open. Inside were scrolls, maps, title deeds, ink-stamped documents with names long erased from the living record. She reached for the first one, then froze. A chair scraped in the dark. A slow clap echoed from the shadows. "Well," said a voice, smooth, arrogant, familiar. "I was beginning to think you'd lost your edge." Miss Beggar Wycliffe stepped from behind a cabinet, flanked by two men in black suits. No badges, no guns drawn, just presence and threat. His smile was thin and cold. "I believe you have something that belongs to me. I didn't ride through fire and ghosts to hand anything over," Nelina said. "And if you want this key, Wycliffe... you better be ready to bleed for it." The vault door hung open behind her like a wound split in steel. Nelina didn't blink. She didn't lower the rifle either. Wycliffe's voice still echoed in the back of the land office, soaked with poison charm and old money. He stood there with two clean-suited men, both built like coffins turned upright. No badges, no names, just polished boots and eyes like glass-hired wolves. "Step aside," Wycliffe said. "You've done your little rebellion, made your noise. But this," he gestured toward the vault, "this is grown-up business." "I am grown," Nelina replied coldly. He chuckled. You're a firecracker in a thunderstorm, loud, bright, and gone before the real storm even starts." Lulu stepped in from behind a column, shotgun drawn. "Then let's make it loud. See who stays standing." Tocho moved in next, steady and silent, flanking the left. Holloway entered last, rifle low, gaze sharp. Seda didn't speak. She stood in the back near the shelves of forgotten ledgers, eyes locked on Wycliffe like a hawk watching a snake try to shed its skin. "I should have finished your line when I had the chance," Wycliffe said, his voice losing the polish. "Your father, your mother, that's where you made your mistake," Seda said. "You thought fire dozen, telieve embers." "Let me guess," Wycliffe sneered. "You're planning to ride out of here, hand over a few crumpled deeds, and what? Hope the press cares. Hope the court listens." "No," Nelina said. "We're not hoping." She turned slightly, enough to show the satchel of documents in her grip. "We're publishing." Wycliffe's eyes narrowed. "This morning," she continued, "copies of these deeds and titles go to every newspaper between Phoenix and Santa Fe. Holloway's already sent riders. The public will know everything. Names, dates, blood." Wycliffe stepped forward, slow and measured. "That's treason." "No," Holloway said. "That's truth." One of the suits moved, a flick of the hand toward his coat. "Don't," Silas said from the shadows, a pistol already aimed at the man's temple. "Try me, city boy." Wycliffe studied them all, faces hard with memory, grit, loss. He tilted his head like someone listening to an old, familiar tune and realizing it was now being sung with a sharper tongue. "This won't end the way you think," he said quietly. "You can't kill a system with papers." "Then we'll bury it in people," Nelina said. "One story at a time." She stepped back toward the vault. Inside, among the scrolls and deeds, was a small black leather ledger. She pulled it free, flipped it open. Names, signatures, bribes, even Wycliffe's. "You left your own name in the books," she said. "That was your mistake. You believed too much in permanence." Wycliffe looked at her. No more smile, just silence. "Then, you won't leave this town." "We didn't come here to leave," Nelina said. "We came to open the door you locked." The room shifted, breath held. The suits tensed again, and behind them dashed footsteps. Boots, dozens, deputies from Prescott, some in uniform, some not. Some of them had known Wycliffe, some had feared him, but none of them spoke now, because Sheriff Holloway stepped forward, badge glinting in the lantern light. "I'm taking him in," Holloway said, "alive, but only just." "We're not here to steal power," Nelina said. "We're here to make sure it never gets hidden again." Wycliffe didn't resist that, least not outwardly. He raised his hands slow, calculated, the way a man does when he still believes the world owes him something. The two suited men didn't move at first, waiting for a signal, but Holloway's deputies had fanned out, rifles steady, and that signal never came. "Take his guns," Holloway ordered. One deputy stepped forward, disarmed the suits. Another secured Wycliffe, binding his wrists with leather straps used for horse bridles. seemed fitting. Wycliffe glanced at the restraint and laughed under his breath. "You all think this ends with me in a cell," he said, eyes locked on Holloway. "You'll be forgotten before the ink dries on your little headlines." "We're not writing headlines," Holloway said. "We're writing records." Nalina handed the black ledger to one of the deputies, a tall woman, with weathered hands and eyes like a canyon storm. "Get this, to the Prescott Tribune," Nalina said, "and to the court clerk's office. First light, no delays." The deputy nodded and walked out with purpose. Wycliffe sneered. "You think judges will turn on me? Politicians. I own half the West." "Then you'll lose half of it," Seda said from behind, her voice as cold and final as a tombstone. "And we'll keep going until we take the rest." Torcho stepped beside her, arms crossed. "You've built your empire on ghosts. Turns out, we're the ones that know how to haunt." Silas lowered his pistol but didn't holster it. "You look tired. Sleep must be hard when you spend decades running from everything you buried." The tycoon's face twisted. Not in fear, he still didn't believe he could lose, but in discomfort, like he was seeing, maybe for the first time, that there were cracks in the world he'd carved. Nalina moved closer, looking him dead in the eye. "You tried to kill my family, silence our land, erase our names," she said. "But you forgot something." He tilted his head, mocking curiosity. "And what's that?" "We remember." She turned her back on him without flinching. The deputies led him out into the pale dawn, where light was just beginning to break over the hills. His boots scraped the wooden steps, like a man being marched toward judgment. Not jail. Lulu stood at the vault, sorting the papers into saddlebags, careful not to smudge the old ink. "These go east," she said. "New Mexico, Colorado, maybe even back east to Chicago. Let folks see what the frontier really cost." Nalina nodded. "And the rest, buried where no one can buy them again." Torcho pulled out a folded cloth, a tribal map, marked with old boundaries, original village names, water routes long paved over. "We redraw the lines," he said. "Truth first." Cedar looked around the officer's shelves, the dust, the lives once trapped in paper. She let her fingers trail across the spines of old ledgers. "This place was meant to keep track of people like us," she said softly. "Now it'll be the place that set us free." Silas chuckled. "Ain't that poetic?" Nalina stepped outside. The sky was pink. Smoke still lingered in the distance, but the birds had started to sing. She felt something shift in her chest. Not relief, not peace, but space, space, where grief had lived too long. Seda joined her, standing shoulder to shoulder. "He'll fight," Seda said. "I hope he does," Nalina replied. "We're not done fighting either." She watched the first rays of light touch the land. It looked different now, like it belonged to them again. "We're not here to steal power," Nalina said. "We're here to make sure it never gets hidden again." The sun was barely above the hills when the first rider from Phoenix arrived. She came in on a sorrel mare, dust-caked boots, clothes plain but clean. Her badge press not lock-clipped to her belt and catching the light. Her name was Marjorie Kane, and she wasted no time dismounting outside the Prescott land office, where the wind still carried smoke and the doors hung open like a story half-finished. Nalina met her on the steps. "I'm here for the truth," Kane said, pulling a leather notebook from her saddlebag. "Word is, you're finally ready to let it speak." "We are," Nalina said, "but we don't just want a story. We want the whole record." Kane nodded slowly. "Then let's start with a name." Nalina tilted her head, watching the reporter's eyes sharp, hungry, skeptical, but not cruel. She remembered that look. Her father had it too, before Hope turned quiet. "Start with my mother," she said. Seda big A inside. The air buzzed with purpose. Deputies sorted papers into crates, marked for various territories. Torcho drew lines across maps with black charcoal. Lulu dictated lists of names to a scribe who'd ridden in from Flagstaff. Holloway had taken a seat at the rear desk, drafting his report to the governor himself, short, blunt, impossible to ignore. Seda sat across from Kane now, her hands resting on the ledger. She didn't need notes. She remembered everything. The land was taken in '56. She began, filed under mining rights, but there was no mine, just water, clean, cold, sacred. They wanted it for cattle, for rails, for power. Kane scribbled fast, her hand moving like lightning, but her eyes stayed locked on Seda. "They sent men," Seda continued. "Then they sent laws. Then they sent breed." The room had stilled. "They didn't take it in one day," Seda said. "They took it in pieces." one name erased at a time. Kane's voice was hushed now. And you ran. I survived, Seda said. In the back, Silas leaned against the wall, watching everything with quiet approval. He didn't trust outsiders easily, but even he could see this wasn't just a newspaper moment. It was testimony. Nelina took over after her mother. She laid out the documents, the forged deeds, the real ones, the bribes, the deaths hidden behind official language. Kane flipped through a few. Her eyes widened. You understand this implicates half the territorial council, she whispered. We understand it's only the beginning, Nelina said. Outside, a crowd had begun to form. Townsfolk, native families from nearby villages. Word was spreading fast, not just about Wycliffe's arrest, but about what the vault had given up. Truth. Truth that couldn't be buried again. I'll need quotes, Kane said. Give them this, Nelina replied, voice steady. She held up the black ledger. Tell them the land remembers. And now, so do we. Kane stood, breath caught somewhere between awe and disbelief. You realize what this means? This could go national, DC even. A hearing, an inquiry, maybe more. Nelina nodded. Let it, or Torcho grunted from the map table. Long as they remember where it started, they will, Kane said softly, because I'll make sure they do. Seda looked toward the rising sun outside the window. Her voice was quiet but clear. Now comes the part where we learn who has the spine to live in a world where the truth has teeth. The land remembers, Nelina said, and now, so does the law. Marjorie Kane stayed longer than expected. She moved like a whirlwind through the land, office interviewing, sketching, reading through names, cross-referencing titles. But it wasn't just her reporter's instinct. It was something deeper, something that settled behind her eyes the moment she flipped to the third page of the black ledger and whispered, my uncle's name is in here. Seda didn't flinch. You'll find we're all in there, one way or another. By mid-morning, the air outside had turned hot, the kind of dry heat that peeled the edge off steel and soaked your bones with fatigue. Still, the people came. Some came in quiet curiosity, others with questions, and more with old papers clutched to their chests, deeds, family claims, crumpled photographs, proof, they hoped. Lulu took the lead in organizing them. She created a list, a system, a calm center in a storm of reawakened history. At first glance, she looked like any sharp-tongued tracker from the hills, but her voice firm and clear was the reason nobody yelled. Nobody cut the line. Torcho set up maps on the outer wall of the office and let the elders pin red thread between the past and now. This canyon used to run full, one old man muttered, tapping a dry creek bed on a yellowed map, until they dammed it in 73. That dam, Torcho said, circling the spot, was signed off the same week Breed filed the ghost deed for Apache Hill. Then it's connected, the man said, looking up for the first time in years with something more than bitterness in his eyes. It always was, Torcho replied. Silas, meanwhile, stayed by the front steps with his rifle. He wasn't waiting for trouble, but if it came, he planned to see it first. From his spot, he watched the movement in town, the shifting of something under the surface. Attention, because not everyone was glad to see this change. Not everyone wanted truth dragged out into daylight. He spotted 3 men in grey dusters watching from across the street. Arms folded, eyes cold. Railroad men, most likely. Investors, maybe. Worse, if they had papers in hand. But they didn't make a move. Not yet. Inside, Holloway stood before the large map nailed to the east wall, watching as Kane drew a line from the mission to the land office. You're writing a new kind of trail, he said. Kane glanced up. Feels more like excavating. Same thing, when done right, he replied. She nodded, then tapped the last pinned point on her diagram. And this hearing in Phoenix, it'll happen, Holloway said. Judge Elston can't ignore this. The press won't let him. Not with names like Wycliffe's floating around. Kane scribbled more notes, but her hands slowed. Will they protect you? All of you. Seda stepped in, quiet as a shadow. That's not what we're asking for. Then what? Just a mirror, she said. Let the world see itself. By noon, a courier arrived from Flagstaff with word. The Phoenix papers had printed the story. Not just a summary, the whole thing, names, numbers, the ledger. Nelina read the first headline aloud on the steps. Truth unearthed, frontier fraud exposed. A cheer broke out, rough and raw from tired lungs. But Nelina didn't smile. She looked toward the horizon, and she knew. This wasn't justice. Not yet. This was the match. The fire came next. The land remembers, Nalina said. And now, so does the law. Under the high, white sun, the town of Prescott stood still, but only on the surface. Behind closed windows, conversations buzzed. Men in suits rode in on horses to clean for the desert. Bankers and surveyors started appearing in the saloon corners, whispering over maps with trembling fingers. Some were afraid, others saw opportunity. All knew something was ending, and something else was about to begin. Nalina stood on the steps of the courthouse with Cedar at her side. Her clothes were dusted from the ride, her boots cracked from heat, but her eyes were steady. She'd been asked to testify at the hearing scheduled in 2 days. But this morning wasn't about waiting, it was about presence. A reminder we need to be seen, she said. Not just our names on papers, not just our words in print. Cedar gave her a faint nod. We always were. They just didn't want to admit it. They walked through the front doors together, where a clerk nearly choked on his breath, seeing them enter so boldly. The man opened his mouth, then shut it again when Holloway stepped in behind them. You've got that look, Sheriff, the clerk mumbled. Good, Holloway said. Means I'm doing something right. Upstairs, Wycliffe waited in a guarded room, cool, polished, and thick with legal men. He sat at a table, one wrist cuffed to the chair, his other hand scribbling something on parchment with deliberate strokes. A lawyer leaned down to whisper in his ear, but he waved the man off, eyes lifting to meet Nalina's as she entered. He smiled. You're walking like a woman who thinks this is over. It's not over, she said, but you are. The smile didn't fade. You should know better. Empires don't collapse in daylight. They rot in corners. Then we'll burn the corners down, she replied. Wycliffe gestured to the window. You see the people out there? They don't want justice. They want calm. And when it comes time to choose between truth and comfort, Cedar cut him off. They'll choose fire. This time, a quiet knock came at the door. It was Kane. Her eyes were wide. They've called an emergency session, she said. The Territorial Council. They're trying to vote a stop the hearing, bury the testimony. They can't do that, Holloway growled. They can try, Kane said. They're pulling strings all the way to Washington. Nalina exhaled, slow and controlled. They're afraid. Tocho was right, Lulu said from behind. Truth don't shake a man unless he's already standing on a lie. Cedar reached into her coat and pulled a folded page in old letter, signed by her late husband, sealed in dust and grief. It was written to a U.S. Marshal, a witness statement, never mailed, never used. Until now. This gets read, she said, into record. I don't care who tries to stop it. Kane nodded. Then we ride tonight. We beat them to the Capitol. Again, Nalina said, a bitter smile at the edge of her lips. They left the room without looking back at Wycliffe. Outside, the wind kicked up, but it didn't carry sand this time. It carried the sound of voices, dozens, maybe more. The town square had filled. Families, elders, young riders, people with no land claims, no title, just memory and rage. One woman stood holding a sign, written in bold ink. This land remembers. So do we. Let them try to silence us, Nalina said. We'll just speak louder. The ride to Phoenix was different this time. There was no darkness, no smoke in the sky or rifles at their backs, just heat and wind and the steady drum of hooves against packed earth. Nalina, Cedar, Lulu, Tocho, and Holloway rode in silence, for long stretches, each of them wrapped in their own thoughts. They were no longer fugitives, no longer rebels. Now, they were witnesses. But what came with that was wait. At a fork in the trail, they stopped to water the horses. Tocho crouched by the creek, splashing water on his face, then stared into it like he expected someone to speak back. This place, he said. My grandfather used to say the water here never ran dry, until the railroad came. Cedar glanced at the cracked banks. It's still running, just slower. Tocho looked up. So are we. Nalina tightened her canteen cap, her hands shaking just slightly. She wasn't tired, not exactly, but the adrenaline that had fueled her for weeks was thinning, leaving something else behind. Fear, maybe. Not of death, not even failure. Fear of not being enough. What if they shut it down before we speak? She asked. They might, Holloway admitted. They've tried before. Lulu wiped sweat from her brow. Then we kick the door in. Cedar turned to her daughter. You already opened the vault, Nalina. This part, this is just telling the world what was inside. The words were kind, but Nalina could still feel the pressure mounting behind her ribs. In the distance, Phoenix shimmered in the heat. bigger than Prescott, louder, more dangerous in a way that didn't wear a badge or carry a rifle. The city had its own rules. As they neared, Kane met them at the city edge, waving from under a patched parasol. Her horse was lathered, her cheeks sunburned. They tried to move the session to a private chamber, she said, but a crowd formed at the steps. They're forcing it open. How many? Seda asked. Kane's voice caught. Hundreds. He rode the final mile as a unit, like a cavalry too stubborn to die. Children ran alongside. Men and women called out names. Nelina didn't recognize most of the faces, but she recognized what was behind them. Recognition. Resonance. They reached the council building just before noon. It stood tall and white, columns cracked with age, but still proud. At the doors, guards blocked the way until Holloway flashed his badge. "These are witnesses," he said, "protected under Article 4. The guards hesitated and stepped aside. Inside, the air was too cold, heavy with politics and polish. The chamber was already in session. Men in vests and polished boots filled the rows, papers in hand, faces pinched with discomfort. Nelina walked to the stand with Cedar behind her. A councilman rose, voice tight. "You were not on the official docket. Neither were the crimes you covered up," she replied. Murmurs rippled. The crowd beyond the chamber doors surged forward, their voices rising. The councilman paled. Another member stood, this one younger, his tie askew. "Let her speak. We owe them that." A beat, a nod. Nalinr stepped into the light. Her voice was calm. She held up the black ledger, the old maps, the unmailed letter, and she began. Not with names, not with facts, but with a memory. Her father, humming a song while carving fence posts in dirt they didn't legally own, but had lived on for generations. Then she told them everything. The theft, the silence, the return. Seda took over halfway through, her voice lower, steadier, older. She told them what it cost. By the end, no one moved, no one dared. "We didn't come here to ask," Seda said. "We came to remind you we were always here." The wind that swept through Phoenix that morning wasn't hot. It was sharp, crisp, as if the desert had decided for once not to suffocate, but to cleanse. By the time Nelina stepped down from the stand, the chamber was silent. The kind of silence that held weight, not awkwardness, not tension consequence. Her heart pounded with a slow, certain rhythm. Behind her, Seda laid a hand on her back. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. They had said what needed saying. And now, the world had to listen. The council recessed without ceremony. Some of the men walked out pale and shaky. Others lingered, whispering, recalculating their next move. But no one dared challenge them directly. The crowd outside roared when the doors opened, not like a riot, like thunder that had been waiting for years underground and finally found its sky. People pressed forward to see them, to touch them, to call them by name. Tocho raised his fist once, just once. The crowd answered like lightning to steel. Later that day, Holloway posted a notice at the Prescott Land Office, effective immediately. All deeds, claims, and titles filed under contested territory between 1856 and 1882 will undergo formal audit and no further sales, developments, or seizures permitted until completion of said review. Signed, sealed, witnessed by law. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. Back in Prescott, the land office had changed. The air no longer smelled like mold and fear. The vault door stayed open now, its inside cleaned, its ledgers locked behind glass, not to hide, but to teach. They called it the Registry of Reckoning. Marjorie Kane's story ran on the front page of every paper west of the Mississippi, and a few beyond. Not everyone believed it, not everyone cared, but no one could say they hadn't been told. Wycliffe was transferred to Santa Fe under military escort. Rumors flew about who still protected him, but it didn't matter. His signature had become a symbol now not of power, but of consequence. As spring crept in over the desert, wildflowers bloomed where old fences had once cut across sacred land. Water flowed again in a few of the creeks, not much, but enough to be noticed. One morning, Nelina stood at the edge of the hill where her father once taught her to ride. The saddle beneath her creaked gently in the wind. The valley below was quiet, but it no longer felt hollow. Seda joined her with 2 mugs of coffee and sat without a word. After a long while, Nelina said, "Do you think we did it?" Seda looked out across the land. "We told the truth. That's more than most, but it doesn't fix everything. It's not supposed to." Nelina glanced over. Then what is it supposed to do? Seda smiled softly. Give someone else the courage to finish what we started. From behind them, voices carried up the slope, children laughing, riding bareback, chasing a dog down the old road. Lulu was yelling something about dinner, her voice as steady and sharp as ever. Torcho was mending a broken wheel axle nearby, humming a song from the old days. Silas napped under a juniper tree, hat over his eyes, pistol within reach. The world hadn't changed, but something in it had. Nalina sipped her coffee. It feels like it belongs to us again. It always did, Seda said. We just had to remind it. Some stories ain't told to win, Seda whispered. They're told so they don't get forgotten. A few weeks passed. Letters began arriving from towns they'd never heard of, small places tucked between ridges and rail lines. Some came from tribal elders, written in fading ink on hides and cloths. Others were from children, dictated to teachers, written in block letters with misspellings and hope. One letter from Utah said, "We've begun digging. We found old papers in the church cellar. My grandfather's name is there. I thought we lost him." Another from southern Colorado simply read, "Thank you. I didn't know we had a voice until I heard yours." They pinned the letters up in the land office. What had once been a vault of silence had become a shrine of voices. Holloway stepped down from his post that summer. Said he'd done what he came to do. No fanfare, no send-off, just a note on his desk and his badge left beside it, polished and warm from the heat of his hand. Lulu found it first. She didn't cry. She simply nodded and whispered, "Good man." They say he rode south, maybe to Mexico, maybe to nowhere. But folks who met him on the trail said he looked lighter, like a man no longer carrying someone else's war. Silas stayed. He took over as acting sheriff not because he wanted the badge, but because he said the town needed someone who knew what to do with both a pen and a bullet. He carried both. Torcho began holding meetings on Saturdays, not just with tribespeople but with settlers, immigrants, farmers. He'd draw maps on the barn wall with chalk, showing water routes, old trade paths, overlapping claims. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes there were arguments, but they talked. And in a place like this, that was the miracle. Seda, in her quiet way, began teaching again, not in a schoolhouse, not with books, but on porches and near campfires. She taught about plants that healed, prayers that strengthened, songs that remembered, the kind of knowledge that couldn't be written down when he passed from hand to hand, heart to heart. And Nally. She rode more now, sometimes alone, sometimes with children behind her, their arms around her waist, eyes wide at every ridge and hawk shadow. She took them where stories were born, in canyons, on ridges, near old stone markers that once held no names but now were being claimed back. One evening, she found herself back where the creek bent sharp near the old sycamore. The sun was going down in streaks of blood and gold. She knelt there and pressed her hand to the dirt. "I hope you see this, Papa," she said. The wind moved the branches, the water glimmer and for a moment, she swore she heard him whistle. Not a ghost, just a memory that had learned how to stay. She stood, brushing the dust from her hands, and walked back toward the trail where Seda waited with 2 horses. "You always come here," her mother said, handing her the reins. Nalina nodded. "It's where I first understood that we didn't lose. We didn't win either," Seda said. "No," Nalina agreed, "but we made them remember, and maybe remembering is how the healing starts." They rode home under a sky that stretched forever, painted in stars and dust. The road ahead wasn't easy. It would take years, maybe lifetimes, to fix what had been broken. But it would be walked now, not by a few, but by many. Together. That was the victory. That was the legacy. "Some wounds never close," Nalina whispered, eyes on the horizon. "But we can teach the next ones how to carry the scar."